What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another video here today. Today we're going to be tackling the American Revolution and the effects that it caused on the world and what started it and everything in between. So it's going to be a good one. Stick around and let's get started. So prior to the American Revolution, through industrialization, North America was controlled by three main European powers, and these were France, Great Britain, as well as Spain. However, the two most important to the American Revolution were France and Great Britain. So Great Britain had control of the eastern coast of North America at the time, which were the 13 colonies that I'll talk about later, and France held control right up to the border of that in central North America. So much like many other times in world history, when two places were colonizing a similar area, there's going to be conflict, and this is exactly what happened. So a great number of land disputes would ultimately boil up between Britain and France, and in 1754, the 7 Years' War would start. Now, Britain would ultimately win this war. However, it cost a lot of money, and they were pretty much broke and in a lot of debt by the end of it. So naturally, what did they do in order to get this money back? They went to the colonies. So in 1764, Britain introduced the Sugar Act in the colonies, which basically meant that the colonies had to pay a special tax on sugar and molasses and other food products like that, and they could only import them from Britain and no other place, creating a monopoly for Britain in order to get them more money. And the colonies weren't too happy about this, but what really sparked the start of this revolution was 1 year later in 1765, when Britain implemented the Stamp Act on the colonies. Now, this act meant that on nearly every product that colonists bought from a particular place, they would have to pay a tax on a stamp that was placed on that product. Now, these could range from playing cards to regular little documents, but pretty much everything had a stamp that they had to pay for. And the colonies were especially upset about this because they didn't have any representation in the parliament that was deciding what acts would be enforced on the colonies. So Britain was making decisions for these colonies without them having any say in it. And this didn't make them very happy at all. So naturally, people in the colonies protested these acts, and they would even boycott some of the goods that were shipped from the British, which greatly affected British businesses and businessmen, and the overall British economy, which was already bad as it is after the 7 Years' War. So after a few years, the British were actually forced to repeal the Stamp Act. Now, this was good for the colonies, but Great Britain still greatly needed money. So in the late 1760s, they implemented new acts on the colonies, such as the Townshends Act. And once again, this led to great upheaval in the colonies and a lot of boycotting of British goods, which had the same effect as before. So Britain realized that what they were doing wasn't really working, so they repealed all the taxes that they had made, except for one on tea. And the colonies didn't like this, so they hopped on a boat and dumped tons of tea into the Boston Harbor to boycott these British goods. Now, many of the colonists weren't very happy with it. A lot of them became increasingly unhappy with British rule of the colonies, to the point where the American Revolution and the goal of independence became a reality. Now, one of the biggest deciding factors in the American Revolution was the involvement of the French in the Revolution. So, France had just lost the 7 Years' War to Britain, and they sided with the British colonies at the time in this war, which made a tremendous difference, providing naval support as well as support on land. And ultimately, after a little under a decade, the North American colonies that were previously under Great Britain's control won political independence and went on to form the United States of America that we know today. Now, this revolution had great global implications as well, because a few decades later, France would go on to have its own revolution, which can greatly be compared to the American Revolution of Independence. And since the French had sided with the 13 colonies during the American Revolution, it is very likely that the French Revolution played off of the American Revolution. And while there are many differences between the French and American Revolution, the fact that the French Revolution happened just decades after shows the great global effect that the American Revolution had on the world at the time. And after the United States of America would expand onward and take up the entire central part of North America to the boundaries that it has today, they would also start imperializing and colonizing other places as well, which shows the great power and influence that it had on the world after the American Revolution. These colonies went from 13 British-controlled areas to one unified and independent state in a matter of decades, and in the next centuries to come, became one of the greatest global superpowers the world has seen.